Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It is the big 2-6, as many of you know, the year 2026, and my sources have informed me that that is actually the year of the Looksmaxer, and everybody is just talking about Looksmaxing. We're not actually talking about MMA anymore, and I am nothing if not a person who hops on trends, so I wanted to hop on this one. Instead of actually doing a breakdown of how Charles Oliveira squares up against Max Holloway in terms of like his skill set, his game plan, I thought it would be better to look at who mogs in this kind of relationship here, and just purely based on physical appearance, who we think should win. Because, as far as skill set goes, Charles Oliveira being the underdog seems like free money, but I wanted to see if there was something deeper going on here that the odds makers knew that maybe I didn't. And, there were some shocking revelations, so brace yourselves. But let me get my camera up out of the way here so you guys can see the slides. Um, so we gotta talk about the low hanging fruit first. When we're doing looks maxing breakdown or we're breaking down somebody's proportions, there are some immediate things that drag them down that we can just notice right away, and we want to address those first before we get into some of the more esoteric details. So we do have to admit, as big of a Charles Oliveira fan as I am, Max does hairline mog Charles. Max's hairline is very straight. Charles obviously has fairly significant temple recession, as you can see by the shapes here I drew on screen. Now, there is some indication of hairline maturation going on here with Max's hairline. You see a little bit of recession in the corner here, but nothing you wouldn't expect from somebody in their mid 30s. Whereas Charles, very significant. It's clear the Norwood Reaper has come for him. He's almost to a Norwood 3 here on the hairline, and that's pretty rough. So that would be his low hanging fruit. Um, he does, however, win some points back because of the way he styles it. He does this forward fringe haircut that kind of frauds a correct hairline. And, you can look at this against Ilya and say, well, this is an older photo because this is obviously the more recent one. You can see his new tattoo being done here. Maybe it's recessed further. But if we look at him in the Islam face-off, it's clear his hairline had the same issues as it does in our current picture. So this is actually just a form of effective frauding, the fringe haircut. And he pulls it off quite well. It's just the lineup wasn't quite as clean on this one. So he does win the points back there. Now, as far as Max goes, his low hanging fruit, we got to talk about the nose. I'm sorry, um, when it comes to these types of things that people can't necessarily control, we don't want to harp on them too much, but we have to get the conversation out of the way. And the thing to note about Max's nose is it didn't used to be the way it is now. His nose was fairly proportionate back in the day, back when he was a young lad. Sorry for the low photo resolution. It's hard to find good pictures of a young Max. His nose has kind of been flattened, though. And this is something that's going to be an occupational hazard of being in a profession or sport where you get punched in the face repeatedly, especially a guy like Max who does absorb a lot of significant strikes. So I do think there are some fighting skill implications to the nature of the nose that we've got going on here. Obviously, he would benefit from something like a rhinoplasty, but that would be the main feature on his face that's holding him back, similar to Charles's hairline. And there isn't really a form of frauding that can help compensate for this the way the hairstyle can for Olivera. But let's get into what everybody's really here for. We're going to look at the actual facial proportions themselves. Sorry. And so we're going to break them down into the thirds. So we obviously have the upper third, middle third, and lower third of each person's face. And right off the bat, Charles does appear to mog here because you can look at the actual size of the thirds and see his are fairly even. They're about the same size. Whereas with Max, his upper third and lower third are considerably smaller than his middle third. And this creates a sort of disproportionate look compared to Charles, especially because Charles, generally speaking, looks to be the more symmetrical of the two. However, there is a problem here, and this was quite disturbing to me as somebody who was planning on favoring Oliveira in this matchup. If we isolate Max Holloway's lower third, he mogs hard. His lower third is damn near perfect. I have not seen a lower third in this ratio that would be considered anything less than Chad-like when viewed in a vacuum, right? Like this is an impeccable lower third, and I just don't think Olivera wins the same way. He obviously has the strong jawline, but symmetry wise, he is absolutely horrifically mogged by Max Holloway here. And like I said, not a fun revelation to have to go through. However, Max doesn't necessarily win the symmetry battle because when we come up to the middle third here, you'll notice the eyes. Max Holloway has slightly offset eyes. If you look at the red line here, the eye on his right eye, the eye on our left side, is in line, whereas this one is slightly above. Charles's eyes are pretty much completely on the line, so very little offsetting with his eyes. So he is winning back a good amount of symmetry points for eye area alone. And then obviously the symmetrical nature of the different sizes of his thirds relative to Max's works in his favor quite a bit as well. Now, when we look at the cheekbones and jawline, I think it's close. Obviously, Olivera has very, very pronounced cheekbones. He gets compared to like Tony Ferguson a lot because of that. But I do think Max is winning the cheekbone battle here too. Like honestly, just his lower third is much better than I thought it was based off the initial rating. Because he's got things like his ears, obviously a little disproportionate relative to somebody like Olivera, that kind of just draw away from this. But if you covered up the top 2/3 of his face, like you really do begin to see how strong this jaw is. So I think he wins some points here for sure. And then the thing everybody wants to talk about in the Looksmaxing space too, canthal tilt. Let's take a look at the canthal tilt here. Obviously, positive is going to be the outside corners of your eyes are above the inside corners. Neutral is fine, you're just in line. But negative is what we want to avoid, generally speaking. So negative is a very tired look. You look like an old man if you have negative canthal tilt. And you'll notice both of them are, in all honesty, canthally kind of cooked. They're not really doing well. However, I will say Holloway's fairly neutral canthally. Olivera does have a very, very slight positivity to it. It doesn't necessarily match his brow area. His brow area does kind of bring it down. But if we're just looking at canthal tilt, I do think Olivera wins that. And so we used a super legit AI in order to actually evaluate these fighters. Now, there is, I think, an overrating based on the fact that both of them are kind of maxed for the male gaze, but since they're both married and they're mixed martial artists, I think it's valid to be male gaze maxing when you're in that space. So we'll see here, the AI actually did give the edge to Olivera, which is consistent with our findings so far. It does seem like Charles has the capacity to MOG, but there are a few more things we need to look at here, especially in the context of a fighter. So let's look at the actual frame. Now, many of you may know that the most searched term in 2026, the big 2-6, was clavicular getting frame mogged by an ASU frat leader. So frame does matter because if you are frame mogged, you will be pretty severely embarrassed by all of your friends and family. They'll feel a great deal of shame for you, as we saw with poor clavicular there. So we want to see who has the capacity to frame mog. And honestly, they're fairly similar frame-wise. But when we look at the width of the clavicle relative to the slope of this sort of taper to the hip bone, I think Olivera does have a little bit more of a Dorito figure. Let me get that bar out of the way. So yeah, you can see it's a little bit more of a Dorito shape than we have for Max here. A factor of this is how far out his lats go as well. It's more in line with the width of the clavicle, as opposed to Max, somewhat underdeveloped lats. Although granted, this is a picture of Max at 45, this is a picture of Charles at 55, so he's a little bit more bulked here. But as a result of that, he's got a bit more of a muffin top going on down here too, which Max obviously doesn't have in this photo. So I think just frame-wise, based on the actual musculature, it's clear frame mog for Olivera, but they are pretty competitive. And the other thing we got to look at is teeth. Olivera probably has the most perfect teeth in the UFC. There's a good chance they're implants, so or maybe veneer. So it's a form of hard maxing, but they are very, very white. And he does squint max, but they seem to match his scalia pretty well. The actual whites of his eyes match with the teeth, so they don't look like super unnaturally white. Although with the sunglasses on, they obviously pop an insane amount. Now, Max's teeth also seem to match his scalia fairly well, but they're just not as white. You just don't have that insane lower third pop we get with Olivera. So here, I think very clearly Charles is mogging once again. And so all of these factors taken into consideration, the proportionality of their thirds, the V taper, the teeth, the ears, the hair, I think we have a pretty clear winner here. Charles does in fact mog in this matchup. Now, there are moments of competition, moments where Holloway does seem to edge him out, like with the lower third, like we were saying. But I think if we're looking at who is the safer bet in the context of a mixed martial arts fight, it's got to be Olivera, purely based on the fact that he mogs. Now, if you want to see like a reason for why game plan wise, Charles might do better, you're kind of looking in the wrong place because, like I said, we're totally devoting ourselves to Looksmaxing now. We're not really going to be concerning ourselves with superfluous details like skill set or who hits harder, who maybe, just dropped Dustin Poirier in their last fight. Things like that don't really matter. Like why would we care about that, right? Like how violent of a striker you are, the fact that you just brutally knocked out Justin Gaethje. None of those things concern me as an Oliveira fan. I am only concerned by the fact that he mogs, and because of that, I know he'll win.